Okay,
Thank you, Karen.
Yep.
Karen, I'm sorry, excuse me. Todd can't get on the meeting. Is there something else that we need to do?
Where is he? Oh, there he is. Sorry. My
You
fault.
got him?
Yep. We got
How'd they
him.
have you?
Thank you.
Thank you, sorry.
Thank you.
Okay, Karen, one more mishap and we take your
Take my hummus away.
I was gonna stop paying you for running the Zoom.
Okay.
Please, stipend. I'm gonna try to send off my copy of it. All right, so Dorothy Day, the mystery of the poor. On Holy Thursday, truly a joyful day, I was sitting at the supper table at St. Joseph's House on Christie Street and looking around at all the fellow workers and thinking how hopeless it was for us to try to keep up appearances. The walls are painted warm yellow. The ceiling has been done by generous volunteers. And there are large, brightly colored icon-like paintings on wood. And some colorful banners and with texts now fading out. And the great crucifix brought in by some anonymous friend with a request that we hang it in the room where the bread line eats. Some well-meaning guests tried to improve on the black iron by gilding it, and I always intend to do something about it and restore its former grim glory. I looked around, and the general appearance of the place was, as usual, homelike, informal, noisy, and comfortably warm on a cold evening. And yet, looked at with the eyes of a visitor, our place must look dingy indeed, filled as it always is with men and women, some children too, all of whom bear the unmistakable mark of misery and destitution. Aren't we deceiving ourselves? I'm sure many of them think in the work we are doing. What are we accomplishing for them anyway? Or for the world, or for the common good? Are these people being rehabilitated? Is the question we get almost daily from visitors or from our readers, who seem to be great letter writers. One priest had his catechism classes write us questions as to our work after they had the assignment in religion class to read my book, The Long Loneliness. The majority of them asked the same question: how can you see Christ in people? And we only say, it is an act of faith, constantly repeated. It is an act of love resulting from an act of faith. It is an act of hope. And that we can awaken these same acts in our own hearts too, with the help of God and the works of mercy, which you, our reader, help us to do day in and day out over the years. On Easter Day, on awakening late after the long midnight services in our parish church, I read over the last chapter of the 4 Gospels and felt I had received a great light and understanding with the reading of them. Quote, they have taken the Lord out of his tomb and we do not know where they have laid him, end quote, Mary Magdalene said. And we can say this with her in times of doubt and questioning. How do we know we believe? How do we know we indeed have faith? Because we have seen his hands and his feet in the poor around us. He has shown us himself to us in them. We start by loving them for him, and we soon love them for themselves. Each one a unique person, most special. In that last glorious chapter of St. Luke, Jesus told his followers, quote, why are you so perturbed? Why do questions arise in your minds? Look at my hands and feet. It is I myself. Touch me and see. No ghost has flesh and bones, as you can see I have. Quote. They were still unconvinced, for it seemed too good to be true. So he asked them, have you anything to eat? They offered him a piece of fish they had cooked, which he took and ate before their eyes. How can I help but think of these things every time I sit down at Christie Street or Peter Marin Farm and look around at the tables filled with unutterably poor who are going through their long continuing crucifixion? It is most surely an exercise of faith for us to see Christ in each other. But it is through such exercise that we grow, and the joy of our vocation assures us we are on the right path. Most certainly, it is easier to believe now that the sun warms us, and we know that buds will appear on the sycamore trees in in the wasteland across from the Catholic worker office. The life will spring out of the chill clouds of that littered park across the way. There are wars and rumors of wars, poverty and plague and hunger and pain. Still, the sap is rising. Again, there is resurrection of spring. God's continuing promise to us that he is with us always, with his comfort and joy, if we will only ask. The mystery of the poor is this, that they are Jesus, and what you do for them, you do for him. It is the only way we have of knowing and believing in our love. The mystery of poverty is that by sharing in it, making ourselves poor in giving to others, we increase our knowledge of and belief in love. Amen. So I thought it'd be nice in this little lens to share with you some of these great Christian thinkers. Okay, thanks to Min for the hummus and pretzels. And Todd, you weren't here when I, so we love you so much that we're gonna eat some on your behalf.
Please do.
You don't like hummus?
No. No, I do. Just it would be difficult to eat it from afar.
Yeah. All right, so this is Cradle to Cross. Well, our study is to not take these events in isolation, Christmas, preaching and teaching and healing, and arrest and crucifixion, but to see them in a continuum. And unfortunately, we too often only take them one at a time. We have a Christmas Bible study. And so we get all up to speed. We have an Easter Bible study, but the in-between stuff, not so much. So that's why we took this Cradle across theme. Last week, we talked about the beginning of ministry. And today, we're going to look at the teaching and healing ministry of Jesus. Next week, engaging the dissents that inevitably came about. And then finally, the question of submission at the time of the crucifixion. So let me stop there a minute and see if you have questions or concerns about what we talked about last week. Or giving you treats is good because, you know, then you don't have questions, you just eat your treats.
That's great.
Please.
Sort of a weird thing, but I realized not after, but during the Bible study and then church and stuff, that the Advent season, you know, and you're looking at it all together, Advent season is an upbeat, happy thing. And Lenten season is not. It's almost somewhat depressing. And so it's a big difference in my, you know,
Your spirit, yeah.
yeah. So I find myself looking much more forward to Christmas.
Yeah.
But the most religious holiday certainly is Easter.
Yeah.
So I'm conflicted a little bit in my feelings, you know. So
Well, and I think your description is what we might call the human condition. To go from Christmas to Easter, joy to joy, and skip the parts in between, but life is not like
No,
that.
right.
And that life, the Christmas and Easter life, does not need a savior. If you have only joy and happiness, you don't need a savior. So no, that's a very apt point. Thank you, Diane. All right, so the teaching ministry of Jesus, there are really two ways Jesus teaches. One is called in parables or parabolic teaching. I ask you now to think. My mother was a walking cliche festival. She had a cliche for each of life's circumstances, no matter what the and they have stuck with me. In fact, I'm slowly turning, well, actually, now with some rapidity, I'm turning into my mother. But they've stuck with me. In a way, they've stuck with me as life lessons. When I went to kindergarten, I remember vividly, my mother said, sit in front and pay attention. And I've done so all my life. I sit in the front and pay attention. Even when I was doing international work for the National Council of Churches, sometimes I would find myself, especially in hostile or kind of scary situations, I like to sit in the front and pay attention. Somehow, the other, and Karen shares an admiration for this one. My mother had a great saying that time wounds all heals. When somebody would do something mean, she'd say, that's all right, time wounds all heals. And no, she was very clever, wasn't she? She was a very smart lady, and very funny. And so I wonder, do you have what are some things that were handed down to you by somebody you love, somebody that have been watchwords for you? And anything come to mind?
Good, better, best, never let it rest until your good is better and your better is your best.
Whoa, all right, do that one more time for us.
Slowly. Good, better, best. Never let it rest until your good is better and your better is your best.
Wow,
Is
that's
that from
good.
your mom?
Hey, no.
It was, isn't it?
It was probably from school.
Yeah,
But
My,
that's so
my grandfather always said that,
real.
is that right?
always, yeah. Until he died, and he didn't say it anymore.
Well, he may be singing it in heaven.
Yeah.
We don't know. What else? Any others come to mind? Yeah.
Honesty is the best policy.
Yeah.
That's always good.
Many hands make light work. That was a big one with my father.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that one's really true. You know,
Yeah.
the more people that come and you start, well, until it gets a little
Well,
crazy.
it's
but-
terribly tedious jobs. Well,
Yeah.
it's terribly tedious jobs become so much fun. I used to take a work camp of kids from when I was a pastor in Lake Forest, Illinois. And we went to Tennessee. And these people were living in tar paper shacks. And I mean, it was a remarkable experience. I met a woman there who believed Franklin Roosevelt was still president. This was 1970. you know.
Wow.
But we would go, and these are rather privileged kids that live in Lake Forest. It's a wealthy suburb of Chicago. And one of the women with us was Margaret Hart. And Margaret Hart, she's in heaven now, but she was the sole owner of Quaker Oats.
Oh, wow.
And she would give us thousands of dollars worth of oat bars and cereals and so on. But we would go, and you know, here's this woman of incredible wealth. I mean, incredible wealth. Up on a roof with two teenage boys. They'd spread out the tar paper and she'd hammer it in. But and we would come to this shack that had been leaking and cold and wet and damp. And by the end of the day, fence was whitewashed, the tar roof was replaced, or the tin roof, whatever it was. Many hands make light work, yeah.
Wow. What a good soul.
Yeah, Margaret Hart was a great soul. What else? Others? Come on. What, I know your mother said something to you.
Yeah. You know, it's weird, like when I used to get scared as a little girl, and this is kind of weird. I actually asked here at the church, I think it was Carlos, about a hymn that was taken off. My mother, when I used to get frightened, and it's because of in our childhood, our upheaval in Cuba, you know, what happened, and I used to get frightened, and I still did, you know, as a child. And it was funny because you know, there's things I don't remember, but there's other things I do. I can so vividly remember leaving Cuba and actually getting searched. Actually, my mother was actually they had to take her clothes off and they searched her. And I still remember that. And I remember clinging to my mother at all times. And when I used to get frightened, my mother said, don't be afraid, never be afraid. And she said, God is always with you and he will take care of you. And then the one thing she used to say, when you're afraid, she said, sing a song, a hymn. And you know what it was? It was Onward Christian Soldier.
Uh-huh.
And she'd sang it in Spanish. And to this day, I can't remember all the words. That's why I said, Carl, how come it's not in the hymn book? And they said they had removed it.
Yeah.
And it really bothered me that they did that. And I think it's because they said it was removed because it was he said militant.
Yeah.
But really, it's not. It's militant against the evil. So it kind of bothers me because how many people around the world still
You're
would
not
do
alone in
that?
that. I
That's the thing
remember.
that would tell you not to be. And I always think about that even now. I still kind of sing the parts I still remember if I'm really afraid of something. And I think about it and I think, it was a song that I remember. There's a movie, one of my favorite old movies is Mrs. Miniver, and they end with that hymn at the church and you see the bombed out church. And that song is what's actually playing, saying, he's really with you. He's going to be there to support you. And that to me was.
That's a very good example. Like a mighty army moves the church of God. Brothers, we are treading where the saints have trod.
Listen, I didn't notice it was missing. I mean,
Well, if that was 1973, remember, we just come off the Vietnam War and all the protests. And I remember it because my mentor was a woman named Alice Weimer. And I was just back from the Middle East in 76. And the hymnal was, which is the blue hymnal, if you remember. A man named Sherm Skinner was the chair of that committee. And my mentor had been one of the staff people to that project doing the new hymnal. And she said, we would get letters about Onward Christian Soldiers more than any other thing. How could you take this out? And Alice said, well, there was a big fight in the committee over that. And also I come to the garden alone. In the garden, yeah. And one, because it was militant, one, because it was so old fashioned and so forth. And she said, Alice said, well, listen, if you ever get in that fight, don't fight with the people who want Onward Christian Soldiers. Fight with the people who say, I come to the garden alone. The odds are better.
I like them both.
Well, there are reasons, whether or not to share those reasons. And remember, there was such a backlash to the Vietnam War that anything that had a military cadence and a military, like a mighty army, moves the church. So
Maybe they can find another thing and start bringing it back.
Yeah.
It's just I don't know. I one of these days I'm going to find an old hymnal just so I can find the words. Because I can never find the way.
I'll Xerox it for you. I have a hymnal at home.
Oh, you did?
I'm pretty sure we're in the supplement.
I was going to say, we had the supplements printed up.
Yeah, the supplements are there. We have them in the choir room and I don't.
I think that's in there.
I'll Xerox it for you.
Oh, thank you. I would have loved it.
All right, so
So I can learn it.
the reason I ask you this is because these phrases, these things we remember, these snippets, are like parables. I am sure that you have recited to yourself that ditty in times of happiness and times of less happiness. I have thought of my mother's, I'll tell you, I can remember being in a kind of a fearsome place in Herzegovina during the battle there in Zagreb, and thinking, look, it's my job to sit in the front and pay attention. I mean, because I was there on behalf of 266 million American Christians that wanted to know what was going on and how we could help. And it gave me bravery. But not exactly bravery, but at least I was able to stay and not go dive under my bed in the hotel room. Parables are like that. Parables, we tend to use parables as allegories. You know, one thing stands for something else. But that is not what parables are. That it was a very common teaching. And you know lots of the prodigals, the prodigal son. You know many parables. I mean, the prodigal son, maybe the Good Samaritan. And we tend to use them as allegories, and we'll take a look at one and we'll look at the difference between an allegory and a parable. So let's look at the sower, Matthew 13, 1 through 9. I have my big study Bible, and so it's got the apocryphal books in it. So nothing's where it should be.
And all the footnotes, right?
Well, and all the footnotes, yes. Listen, the footnotes are my friend. Okay, so who will read for us?
I'll be happy to.
Okay.
Karen's on it, go ahead.
That same,
Wait, Karen, would you go through, go through 9, please.
okay. That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea. Such great crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat there while the whole crowd stood on the beach. And he told them many things in parables, saying, listen, a sower went out to sow. And as he sowed, some seeds fell on the path, and the birds came and ate them up. Other seeds fell on rocky ground where they did not have much soil, and they sprang up quickly since they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched. And since they had no root, they were withered away. Other seeds fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. Other seeds fell on good soil and brought forth grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. Let anyone with ears listen.
Okay, now, how have you understood that parable? Yeah,
Well, for years, I always thought, like, well, what kind of ground am I?
mhm.
Until one of your sermons made me think the other way,
Aha.
because I had never heard that approach before.
And what, do you remember what that was?
That the sower, this is about the sower, and you keep sowing no matter what.
Yeah, the that's excellent, man. That's very encouraging. That is very encouraging. Thank you. An allegory is to say, okay, what kind of ground am I? Am I the rich soil or am I like thorny ground and it just gets choked out with the busyness of my life? Or are there such pressures on me? It's like the sun that burns the seeds up.
Sorry, this is Karen Norby. Let me just see what you.
Absolutely. That's not what that's an allegory.
Right.
One of the reasons this is an important exegetical or interpretive point is this is not about you. This is about God revealing God's self through Jesus Christ. This is not about you. And so the point of the story parabolically is the steadfast commitment of the sower to always keep sowing, no matter what. If there's drought, sow. There's rocks, sow. There's thorns, sow. Whatever there is, keep sowing. And in due course, there will be growth of the good news of the love of God and so on. So, thank you, Min, that's, to think that people are paying attention, yes.
I have a question. Oh, I'm
Yes,
sorry. Is it also fair to say that this parable could really be about the seed too, and not just necessarily the sower? The seed grows in good soil. It doesn't grow when you're, trying
see,
to.
I would call that an allegory.
Okay. Okay.
And this is a very familiar teaching device among ancient Near East rabbis. It's a rabbinical teaching method. And the reason that they teach like that, remember, nobody's literate, almost no one is literate. So what we know is oral. And so if I give you a puzzle, like the parable of the sower, you can think back over it many, many times. It's like time wounds all heals. I mean, it's something you think of over and over again. And that's the point of a parable. Let's take another look at another parable. Let's look at the rich fool, Luke 12:13 through 21. And who will read for us? See, this is how I get to eat my snacks. It's a Tom Sawyer approach to Bible reading.
I can read if you like.
Thank you, Robin.
Okay.
Luke 13 through 21, please.
Okay.
Get there.
Okay. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide with me." And Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" Then he said to them, "Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man produced a good crop. He thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, how far am I going?
21.
Okay. Then he said, "This is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And there I will store all of my grain and my goods. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of good things laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded of you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with anyone who stores up things for himself, but is not rich toward God."
All right, so this, I picked the sower because it's such a well-known one, and I picked this because I think it's a lesser known one. And this is the rich young fool. And I don't know about you, but as I get older, stuff becomes less and less and less important to me. There are some things that I have in the house, some that I've moved, 3 houses worth, I mean, for 35 years. And really, frankly, here's a good example. I have lots of silver from my mother and grandmother. My children are no more interested in silver than in the planet Jupiter, it's not of interest to them. Those have been in the family for 100 years. And you know what? I really don't care about them. I just feel like I should care about them. Not that I do care about them. And so I think this is an interesting parable. That's again, it's not an allegory. It's really a Jesus teaching that building bigger barns. And if you look around, just drive around New Jersey, son, how many storage units there are. With all that stuff.
Right.
And then you have the storage wars, the people that never come back.
Yeah, yeah, that's a television.
Yes.
That show.
I get it.
But this is a parabolic way of teaching, and so Jesus is teaching by telling these stories. Why? Because the people can't go home and read their Bible. They can't read and they don't have Bibles. They can remember stories. And so that's, now let's just think, can you name some other parables? Prodigal son,
I would say the Good Samaritan.
Good Samaritan,
Right, yeah.
The workers in the vineyard.
yes. And the ladies with their lamps and their oil, and so on. So, just when you hear parable, resist the temptation to make it an allegory. And you'll get closer to understanding what Jesus was teaching about. So let's talk about didactic teaching. Didactic, just meaning here, direct. You know, when I say to a child, or if Cradle's child, this is an A. It's the first letter in the alphabet. It's an A. Can you say A? And that's didactic teaching. I'm not telling you why.
Right.
I'm not asking you whether you like it. It's just didactic. And so the best known didactic teaching is the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes. But that is such a complex, blessed are, the formula, blessed are the meek, inherit the earth, but they got to share it with the poor in spirit. You know? So I left that aside and picked some other didactic teaching. And this is where Jesus is flat out telling you what he thinks you ought to do. So let's take a look at that. Let's look at Luke 5, 4 through 11. Thank you. Just wait a second till everybody gets.
Okay.
Wait till you stop hearing pages turn.
So you did the pretzel.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Read slowly. This is my pal over here. She knows.
When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep water and let your nets down for catch. Let down your nets for a catch." Simon answered, "Master, we have worked all night long, but have caught nothing. Yet if you say so, I will let down the nets." When they had done this, they caught so many fish that their nets were beginning to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both boats so that they began to sink. But then when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." For he and all who were with him were amazed at the catch of fish that they had taken. And so also were James and John, sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. Then Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid. From now on, you will be catching people." When they had brought their boats to the shore, they left everything and followed him.
Okay, now this is a puzzling one. It's, a famous theologian who was preaching on this, Paul Tillich, if you know that name. But he says in his didactic teaching, Jesus is not equivocal, bossy. He says, Simon, in other accounts, this is in, I think, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, in one of the other accounts, that people are woeful and they're fished all night and they haven't caught anything. And Jesus says, put down your nets, and then they get this great catch of fish. But it's interesting, Jesus doesn't hand out fishing advice, doesn't say, Have you tried mackerel? It's a better bait. It doesn't say, the other side of the lake is more abundant in fish. And he doesn't say, look, you're in too shallow water, move back out a little into deeper water. Put your net down where you are. And that didactic teaching is Jesus saying to you, put your net down where you are. Not use another bait. And I like this very much. Tillich makes the point that the church is always saying, is there a better bait? Is there a better section of this lake we could be? And Jesus says, no. Put your net down where you are. Do you get what I'm saying or not? That you are where you are how you are, you have what you have, and that is sufficient. Put your net down where you are. Because wherever you are, there are people in need. There are people that are hopeless. People that are we were talking about Marion Blackford a little earlier. I was so proud. I mean, I'm not the pastor here anymore. I'm just one of the gang, but I was so proud of this church to show up at the Colonial Funeral Home in a whip stitch, and we know all the complications. Yes, we know. We know who Marion is. We decided nevertheless to put our nets down where we were. And as a result, Alan Novak had a great send-off. Put your net down where you are. If only I had, I could do, put your net down where you are. Jesus doesn't ask you to, if I were a physician, I could go to Gaza and I could heal. Put your net down where you are. Don't dream about somebody else's lake. Or how much better things would be if you had mackerel for your bait. Put your net down where you are. And so then the question becomes, well, didn't they do that? And they caught no fish. Well, what are we to make of that? Seek the grace of God and put your net down
Faith,
where you are.
faith.
So, I know there's been some talk about the Valentine folks, sometimes the coffee hour looks like the dining room over at the Valentine house, right? I mean, well, I think we can help. I mean, we can help folks to understand this is not a dining table, this is a serving table. And, we take our food and go sit down and or go in the other room or whatever. We can do that. But that table is, in fact, our determination to put our net down right where we are. The rest is just window dressing. And so then this becomes a powerful story, doesn't it? Simon Peter, stop doubting, just put your net down where you are. Never a word about changing bait, changing technique, getting a new fishing rod, moving to another part of the right where you are. And that has always been to me a wonderful command to me and to the church as a whole. Wherever you are, that's the place to put down your net. Not if I were a surgeon, I could do so many good things for the people of Ukraine. Yeah. Where you are with what you have now, relying on the grace of God.
Did Peter say go away from the sinful man because he didn't believe that Jesus was going to let them catch more fish?
I think that's right. I think what he's saying is, I am not worthy of you. And Jesus is in fact saying, and that too is a prideful statement. This is not about your worthiness. This is about the grace of God. Put your net down where you are. And by the way, you will be hereafter fishing for people. So it's. I think the best translation of Peter here would be, Lord, I am not worthy of your blessing. I'm a sinful man. And you've given us all this fish, and I'm not worthy. And Jesus is saying, this is not about you. This is about the grace of God. This is not, you have only a walk-on part in this book. This book is about God. This is not about you. And we keep drawing ourselves right in the center of the stage. And it's not about us.
But it's about the faith, right?
It is about
Showing
the-
them about the faith. You have to have the faith in him.
That's right.
So it's about your faith within you as a
Well,
person of.
but it's really a demonstration in word and deed of
That he's
God's
there.
faithfulness.
That he'll be there.
But we keep putting ourselves, no kidding, we just, do you see it? We keep putting ourselves in the middle of the stage and going.
Right.
Applause. It's not about us. So, if you remember nothing else from the teachings of Jesus, this is a good lesson. Put your net down right where you are. Because don't we often tell ourselves, if I had such and such, I would do more. And the Jesus lesson is, you have plenty. You have my love. You have God's grace. Put your net down. So, okay, the healing ministry of Jesus, let's go to that quickly. Let's go to Mark 2, 1 through 12. This is one of my favorite stories. I like to preach this text.
Oh, roof stuff?
Roof stuff. Okay, Min, are you able to read for us?
I didn't get there yet.
Mark, dear. Okay. Mark 2?
When he returned to Capernaum after some days, it was reported that he was at home. So many gathered around there. I gotta get my glasses.
All right, you know what?
I'll read.
When you return to Capernaum. All right, go ahead, Diane.
A few days later, when Jesus again entered Capernaum, the people heard that he had come home. So many gathered that there was no room left, not even outside the door, and he preached the word to them. Some men came, bringing to him a paralytic, carried by 4 of them. Since they could not get him to Jesus because of the crowd, they made an opening in the roof above Jesus, and after digging through it, lowered the mat the paralyzed man was lying on. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, "Son, your sins are forgiven." Now some teachers of the law, I forget where I'm reading to.
6 to 12.
Okay, now some teachers of the law were sitting there, thinking to themselves, why does this fellow talk like that? He's blaspheming, and who can forgive sin but God alone? Immediately Jesus knew in his spirit that this was what they were thinking in their hearts, and he said to them, why are you thinking these things? Which is easier to say to the paralytic, your sins are forgiven, or to say, get up, take your mat and walk? But that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. He said to the paralytic, I tell you, get up, take your mat and go home. He got up, took his mat and walked out in full view of them all. This amazed everyone, and they praised God, saying, we have never seen anything like this.
Okay, this is a story now, to understand the story fully, you have to appreciate what homes were like in the ancient Near East. And at the top of the roof is a thatch. And then below that, some mud, and then some boards that hold the roof up. And so, I mean, we can imagine this, right? A famous person comes to town, and we have a paralyzed friend, and the four of us decide, hey, we're gonna go get that guy, bring him to this teacher, that'd be great. But as we walk over to his house, we see it's so crowded, we'll never get in the front door. And of course, our friend can't walk, so we gotta haul him around on a sheet or a blanket or something. So then Karen gets a really good idea. Let's go up on the roof and we'll get in through the roof. Now, let's look at the story from the point of view of the paralytic. This morning, he was just crippled. Now he's crippled and on top of a roof. The situation has not improved. Okay?
And the person that owns the house is.
I was thinking that.
Meanwhile, our previous leader Karen has got us up there, we're pulling and stuff. Now we're getting through the mud. Falling down with Jesus and all the people. And then we lower this guy to Jesus. And what are the questions? What are the questions that are asked? Who do you think you are to heal this person?
Yeah, it's blasphemy.
It's blasphemy.
Blasphemy.
And he says, take up your mat and walk. And so this is a quintessential Jesus healing story. And we're often so focused, we're modern Western thinkers. Well, what was wrong with him that Jesus could heal him? What, like, it was it polio, or was it a traumatic spinal injury? Well, those are kind of the wrong questions.
But he said his sins were forgiven. I mean, it's not like he was paralyzed because of his sinful life. So I thought that was an odd thing that Jesus would say that.
Well, it is if you're thinking like an ancient Near Eastern. People are sick because of something they or their parents have done. And so they have leprosy, they're blind, they're now, I have a sister who's developmentally delayed. She was born in 1953. And thank you. And even at that time, there's a stigma. Did the mother drink? Did she take drugs? Did she? Is this? Well, it's none of that. It's the luck of the draw. In her case, it probably had to do with it was my father was injured, and my mother was a military dependent and was given thalidomide. So that probably is the explanation. That's the medical explanation. But in the ancient Near East, you were sick or lame or crippled or blind or deaf because you sinned. And so for one to say your sins are forgiven, take up your mat and walk is a powerful illustration. Now, we do know that all kinds of things get healed by circumstances that are inexplicable in science. And so this is one of those occasions. And we don't know what made the man able to stand and walk. But this is a quintessential healing in which the drama of Jesus healing goes like this. Jesus is here, the one to be healed is here, and there are surrounding people who doubt that he can heal, and when he does are really a little ticked off by it. That's the rhythm of Jesus healing. And the person that's healed is always grateful. And what happens if Jesus says, go and don't tell anybody?
They go right out and tell everybody.
Right, exactly. Exactly. Don't tell anybody. I used to, with my children, for whatever reason, I would sometimes say to them, and don't tell anybody. And they liked that we were pretending to tell a secret. And don't tell any, well, what Jesus says, don't tell anybody, that's a sure sign everybody's gonna know. It's a sure sign. We go out and broadcast. But as you think about the healings of Jesus, think of this. Now, to me, the heart of this story, I'm not surprised that Jesus can heal by the forgiveness of sins. I think he's healed me more than once, in the course of life. What the essence of this story is, some people can't get to Jesus without the help of others. That paralytic would be back in his room, crippled forever, except 4 friends decided to take him. And they weren't even put off their task by the great crowd at the front door. No, no, no. They said, we'll redouble our effort. Let's go up on the roof, of course. So I use this as a kind of an exemplar of Jesus' teaching. There's always the person that is broken or blind or whatever. There's always the naysayers around. And there is always Jesus' admonition to the person that you will be well. Okay, let's look at John. We don't have too many of these in the Gospel of John, so let's look at John 5:1-15. Who goes on forever, I know.
You feeling at the pool? I'll read.
Okay, thank you. 1-15.
Sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for a feast of the Jews. Now there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. One who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" "Sir," the invalid replied, "I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me." Then Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your mat and walk." At once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked. The day on which this took place was a Sabbath, and so the Jews said to the man who had been healed, "It is the Sabbath, the law forbids you to carry your mat." But he replied, "The man who made me well said to me, 'Pick up your mat and walk.'" So they asked him, "Who was this fellow who told you to pick it up and walk?" The man who was healed had no idea who it was, for Jesus had slipped away into the crowd that was there. Later, Jesus found him at the temple and said to him, "See, you are well again. Stop sinning, or something worse may happen to you." The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well.
Okay, now,
There again, Jesus said, "Stop sitting." I don't see the correlation.
Well, that's because you're a modern Western person.
I lived back then.
And you believe all sickness derived from sinfulness.
Or is it always your own, or
No,
are the
it's,
sins visited
you're-
to the children from?
it
the
could be your
family?
parents, it can
Right.
be somebody else. All right, so first of all, you know the National Institute of Health,
Mhm.
where are they?
Washington.
No,
No,
yes,
Mar-
where?
Bethesda.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
Hello. Good morning. That's why the National Institutes of Health are in Bethesda for this story.
How about that?
How about that? Oh, don't tell anybody. Apparently, it hasn't been told quite enough. All right, so Bethesda is, of course, the name of great healings. And this is a story. I selected this story as an example because this has a dimension to the story that is not present in the others. And it's not the longevity of the suffering. What is it? Do you know? Well, that's on the right track. Jesus said, hey, you've been here for 38 years? Yeah, you're not healed yet? You still come here every day? Like, what's wrong with you? So what does he ask him? Do you wish to be healed? Because there's reason to doubt, isn't there? The guy, I mean, this is the absolute Eeyore story. I'm here every day for 38 years, but when the water is stirred up and that's the time of healing, people jump in front of me and they get there and I can't ever get there. I can't move from my, and by the time I get there, the water stops stirring and I never get healed. And I've been here 38 years. And did I mention people push in front of me and they go down? And Jesus said to him, I mean, quite understandably, he goes, and well, hey, do you want to be healed? It's like, why aren't you pushing?
Right.
So there, this story, we say technically that this story shows that healing and wholeness, whether physical or emotional or psychological or whatever, is dependent on the grace of God, but there is a role for the volition of the infirmed. You follow me? Do you wish to be healed? And if you don't wish to be healed, neither the waters nor the grace of God will attend you. But it is that combination, it's the sweet spot, if you will, where your determination to be well and God's graciousness come together. They're both necessary, but only together sufficient conditions for the healing. And so I tell you this story because this is a dimension to the healing that we see time and time again. There are 42 stories of Jesus healing. In fact, there's more stories of Jesus healing than of teaching or preaching in the New Testament. So in the Middle Ages, Jesus was most in the patristic period, the early church. Jesus is often known as the Lamb of God, the Son of Man, and so on. In the Middle Ages, he's known much more commonly as the great physician because of these 42 stories of healing. Yeah, the great. Do you know, you've heard that
Oh, yeah.
reference, the great physician? All right, so that's what I have for you today. What I want to put this back in context now, if you're looking at your study guide. So last week we saw that he was beginning his career. Some were hoping for a military messiah. He says, oh, you know, me, I come to release the captive and save the oppressed. And, so then we're now in the midst of his career. Remember, his career is only about 2 years and 10 months long, start to finish. And you know, that's a busy boy, 42 healings and so we see that he is teaching and healing. And you heard for the first time in this account, did you hear those words that Marilyn said? Who is he to do such a thing as heal on the Sabbath? And that's the seed that will become the descent. So we still have that messianic identity and the secrecy. And next week we'll take a look at what it means to engage that descent. Let me stop there, see what questions or comments you have, including those of you on Zoom. I'm having another pretzel, so think of a good question or statement or something.
I was thinking about a conversation last week with, you know, did he know he was the guy, you know, between when he was a kid or when he was newborn till when he was 30 years old or whatever? And did Mary ever have the discussion, you know, let me tell you what happened to me. So, I mean, most parents brag about their kids if they're not jerks. And, you know, she would have at least kind of told him to, you know, that you're chosen, you're special. And I don't have any knowledge of that. Is there any record in the Bible at all about, I'm not even framing this in a question, it's just a general discussion.
No, but this is a good point. So in a way, Todd is suggesting to us that we think about what's Jesus' psyche like? What's he like? Well, he's not arrogant, he's humble. We see that. This is a season of hot and cold running Messiah wannabes, right? And he, as the lot goes, is a rather modest. And the content is different. His content, and I said last week, as a nation, we're in the same circumstance right now. Some say, for the circumstance we're in, we need a brute to isolate us from all the troubles of the world and people that aren't like us. And others say, no, we have to find a leader that restores our dignity and helps us be the kind of people we have hoped and believed we were. Well, those are flashing notions of messianic hope. And Jesus is very clearly on one side of that divide. He's never talking about raising an army. He's only talking over the world, taking over the world, right? Well, excuse me. And quite to the contrary of Jewish practice at the time, as we know, he heals people that the woman at the well is not even a Jew. You're not supposed to heal on the Sabbath. That's not what you do on the Sabbath. And he's saying the wholeness of my brother or my sister is more important than an arbitrary rule. So what kind of self-understanding does he have? I don't know, Todd, and that's a really good question, and one that Christians have asked for 2 millennia. And I really doubt we're going to solve it right here today. But I think there's every reason to believe that Jesus was well psychologically, that he'd been not a damaged kid, you know, that he'd been raised in the faith. His father was an artist and a carpenter, so they weren't the poor of the poor of the poor. That's the trades, so to speak, you know. And so now, as a young man, my guess is that he is a faithful Jew who believes that God has called him into some kind of life route, the details of which are not clear to him.
Didn't he talk about being in his father's house when he was young, when he was in the temple, even he knew.
Yes,
In some way, he knew.
well, that's what I'm saying. I think there's evidence that he had a sense of vocation, we could call it.
Mhm.
But I don't think the details. You know, if you ask, was Jesus sitting there going, hey, you just wait, Pontius Pilate is gonna, and no, I don't think at that level of detail. I think he knows that he's been called to faithfulness. And doesn't know where it's gonna take him. And, you know, I think every minister that's ordained, every elder that's ordained. Agrees to be ordained without knowing precisely what that's going to require. When I was ordained, I was sure I was gonna be an assistant pastor. In Christian education. I, in fact, have never been a assistant pastor. Or a Christian educator by job description. I had no idea that I would work for an international body and go all over the world. I didn't even know people did that on behalf of the church, let alone me.
Makes me think, like, so many times we read Jesus went off to pray. Don't you think that's what he was doing, like trying to
Discern, yes.
what is it I'm doing, or what do you want me to do?
Yes, I think that's what he was doing, but I don't think if the content of the prayer, you know, please smite Pontius Pilate so that he's nowhere around by the time I get in trouble in Jerusalem. I don't think that. I think it's keep me faithful to this task wherever you call me.
Hmm.
All right, so we'll see you next week. I thank you very much.
Yeah, we're actually gonna be there next week, so can we bring in the snacks for next Tuesday?
No, I have snacks for next Tuesday, and Eileen is making soup for the fourth Tuesday. She's making lentil soup. And are you bringing bread?
Peta?
Pita bread. Min's bringing pita bread.
Okay.
Unless Todd and
But
Denise bring pita
you
bread,
know,
since you already brought.
one thing I asked Pat to do yesterday, maybe you, the Brinkerhouse could do. Is to make sure we have bowls and soup spoons, you know, the plastic soup spoons. It's a whole different world to eat your soup out of a teaspoon.
Right.
The soup spoon.
I gotta go. I have to go.
Yeah,
Bye,
take it.
Hi, Robin.
Bye.
Bye,
What do you
Robin.
think of these bowls? Are too small or?
No, those are perfect, but we need soup, the
No, we have-
plastic soup
We have
spoons.
bowls already.
We have.
Kitty, are you with me? You know what I'm
All
talking
right,
about?
yeah, we'll bring the bowls and the soup spoons.
All right.
Well, we have bowls.